Hello there guys, what is going on? SonOfChelsea back here again for another edition of Let's Talk Chelsea. Hope you're doing well and keeping safe on this Thursday. Earlier upload of Let's Talk Chelsea today because it is that time of year again, fixture release date for the Premier League season, the 2022-23 campaign. We're going to react to Chelsea's fixtures. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen them already and trying to break them down. It's always exciting, I think, this day. I know some people are quite cynical because of the nature of the game now, how much times and TV and scheduling things get changed and shifted around, which especially for a club like Chelsea, as we get into later parts of the season, and we saw the COVID sort of chaos last year that postponed and moved around a lot of games. Not Chelsea's, but there are things within the season, particularly this year, the biggest change is the World Cup taking place between November and December. And there is, I think, a lot of debate to be had around the impact that's going to have on squads, particularly post-World Cup and even maybe before, because of the way players are trying to sort of avoid injury and the fatigue, which I think is a massive part as well. But let's get into it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, notification bell. We will touch a little bit on Lukaku as well at the back end of this video because there was an update last night over that deal. But let's get into it. Plain. Everton away, opening day of the season at Goodison Park. The rematch between Frank Lampard and Thomas Tuchel. Round 1 went to Frank, the 1-0 win back in April for Everton. This is a very tricky opening game. I mean, it just is. Goodison Park is notoriously a bad ground for Chelsea. We have not won there in the Premier League since April 2017 with Antonio Conte. As people have pointed out, there actually is a bit of a good omen. I think in nearly all of our title-winning seasons, we've won at Goodison Park. There may be one exception in there, but we've had a pretty decent record. When we went at Everton, we seem to have a good season, but I don't think a title challenge is that realistic this year. But Everton, the job Frank did there last year, it was a really bad performance at Goodison Park in April. I think in terms of that really poor run-in from Chelsea, this was kind of one of those really, really poor performances. But as I say, it's a new season. It's a fresh start, and Chelsea do seem to do better in the early months of the season. So I think that, smashing that hoodoo, which is big for Thomas Tuchel, winning the game, getting the season up and running. I think based on the other fixtures I've seen across the Premier League on the opening day, I think this is probably absolutely going to be on TV, and, expected narrative is very high. So there's that. It's a tricky opening day, but it doesn't get much easier in terms of interest and in terms of rivalry. A week later, Tottenham at home, one of the games people always look out for from Chelsea fans' perspective. Antonio Conte, another Chelsea connection. People very hyped about Tottenham at the moment, the early business in the transfer window they're doing. Given how close actually both teams were in the Premier League at the end of the season, there's a belief that Tottenham with Conte, they're going to do a lot better, and even some people suggesting they could even challenge for the Premier League title. I think that may be a little bit naive or a little bit flippant, given that we still are quite early into the window and knowing Conte and how abrasive he is. But it looks so far they're building quite a good squad and they're going to keep some of their big players. But again, Chelsea, I think for the first home game of the season, we need to get our home record and our home form fixed, and no better way to do it than not only beating Tottenham, winning our first home game of the season, and also knocking their confidence early on and hopefully frustrating Conte. To round out the opening 5 games, Leeds away, I mean, that's a big one historically. Leicester at home and Southampton away. Then going into, say, the top 6 games in the first half of the season, the other top 6 games, we've got Liverpool at home September the 17th, Man United at home on the 22nd of October, Arsenal at home on November the 5th. There are return games with Liverpool in January, and we do face Man City for the first time at home in early January as well. And then Man United and Arsenal all in the latter part of the season. So it does look a little bit tricky in terms of the way it's been weighted in sort of home and away games, big home and away games this season. It seems that for the first part of the season, Chelsea are playing all at home, and then it's going to be more difficult later on in the year. The last game before the World Cup, Newcastle away from home. Newcastle, they're another interesting, I think, outfit. They're in continued improvement under Eddie Howe. Was a sort of a bad ground for Chelsea to go to historically, but we've actually won our last 2 games there now without conceding a goal. I think scoring five goals or something. So hopefully again a good win there this year. I would say, this is the final game before the World Cup, and as some people pointed out, it's going to be very interesting to see as we get closer to that date, the World Cup, how these games are played out intensity-wise. And there is a fear that we could get to that game and there'll be a lot of players just trying to avoid injury. So that, is a concern. The return post the World Cup, which is going to be very intense, Boxing Day at home to Bournemouth. which is a nice game at home. But again, how is the squad going to be looking? Are some of those fringe players going to be getting chances? The need to have a bigger squad this year, I think, is so important. And as Tuchel has stressed, 5 subs, I think, is a big addition, particularly for squads like Chelsea. Forest away on New Year's Eve. Of course, they're the newly promoted side. I'm actually quite glad to have Nottingham Forest in the Premier League for the first time in my lifetime. I think that it is going to be exciting for Chelsea to go up against them, to see how Nottingham Forest do, such a big club. New Year's Eve. There was a nice report from the Telegraph that they had cancelled, because of the World Cup this year, they had cancelled the sort of the 28th, 27th of December game. But based on what I'm looking at the schedule, it looks like it's just been moved to early January, because Chelsea face Bournemouth on the 26th, Nottingham Forest away on the 31st, so there is that gap. But then very quickly we've got Man City at home. Of course, that could be moved for TV, but still it's quite an intense return to Premier League action, and the delay of getting those players who've been at the World Cup back into the team, I think it's going to be a general problem. But there is a concern there, I think, with fatigue, and generally that is my concern for the rest of the season, is the quality of football, the amount of games players are being asked to be involved with. I mean, at the elite level, who of course these players want to be involved. Gareth Bale pointed out whilst he was on international duty with Wales recently, they sort of tallied it up. Kevin De Bruyne could play close to 80 games next season. I don't think he will, because this is a guy who does get 1 or 2 injuries throughout the season. But I look at someone like Mason Mount, who has just come off the back of a 63 game season, so he matched the amount of games Chelsea played in total. I don't think it's good, and I don't think it's going to make football better. I don't think it's progress, no matter what Arsene Wenger tries to tell you. And I just have deep concerns that by the time we get to March, April, May, the quality of football, I think, is going to really deteriorate, because there's only so much I think the human body can take, and there's only so player fatigue is very real. No matter how much these footballers are paid, I still think that's a serious conversation. And I feel and I fear that, a bit like what we saw during the lockdown phase, when there was such a small gap between one season ending and a new one, we saw so many games played out without much energy, and I fear we're going to get that this season. I think that very much from a Chelsea perspective, it means that we have to have a better squad. I think you have to have more suitable options for Tuchel to use in and out of games. I look at that sort of post-World Cup period between sort of late December, January, February time, which is where Chelsea really struggled last season, when we got a few injuries to key players, and Tuchel was really relying on players who sometimes didn't fit in their positions and didn't elevate the system. That is something that we're constantly having a conversation about. But listen, I think the ambition, before we wrap up on this, the ambition for the season for me, I think last year we were all thinking about a title after the Champions League, when that's not the case this year. I think people were being quite realistic given the amount Chelsea have to do in this window. But I do still think third place is a realistic ambition for Chelsea, and I do think that a higher points tally is also a realistic thing for Chelsea, because I still look at last season, I've looked at recent seasons, Chelsea, the amount of draws we had at home, particularly that home form, that is my great frustration. I think people will look at the big games and will moan about where they're placed in the season. That is consistently been a problem for Chelsea in the seasons. Actually, the lesser games, as you call them, the games where Chelsea are expected to win, and those are the games where Chelsea dropped a lot of points last season at Stamford Bridge. That home form needs to improve. I think Thomas Tuchel, his attack vastly needs to improve. You'd like to think there's going to be more consistent performances. Some of that is down to fortune of keeping key players like Reece James and Ben Chilwell fit for the majority of the season, and hopefully getting the right signings in to form quite a cohesive team, and just seeing across the season a more consistent Chelsea, a Chelsea that you can see is developing, see is growing, see is rebuilding, and is going to have some flaws along the way, absolutely, particularly if you're bringing in 3 or 4 players, those players have to adjust, but at the same time, hopefully a more uplifting end to the season than it was last time. As we know of Chelsea, the chaos of Chelsea Football Club, this time last year, none of us knew that by this time there'd be a new ownership. We were going to be under sanctions, the players leaving. It's chaos at Chelsea Football Club. My hope is with the new era, we get less of that and it can be more of a stable season. But the World Cup is a massive, massive problem, I think, in terms of what it's going to do. I think to squads. A lot of teams have to deal with that. I'm not trying to make out that that's a solely Chelsea problem. I don't think Chelsea fans should try and make out that it is. A lot of clubs are going to be dealing with that. Could it benefit us? Could it not? Let's wait and see. Before we do wrap up, Inter We spoke about Romelu Lukaku, the loan fee and the negotiations, and Todd Boehly opening talks with the Serie A club. Fabrizio Romano tweeting last night that Inter have made an opening bid for Lukaku of €5 million. Chelsea have rejected this proposal and Inter are waiting for a price tag. Talks will continue. Lukaku has told Boehly and Tuchel he only wants Inter to move, so he's pushing. I do wonder if that fee goes up to 10 million, that the deal will be done, particularly if Inter are willing to take most of his wages. But then there are reports coming out of Italy this morning that an agreement could be close. I do think if you're wanting this deal to be done quite quickly, the reporting from the Telegraph that I spoke about in yesterday's video suggests that on all parties they want to get this done or close to done by the end of this week, which is quite interesting given the finances involved in this, that it could be done as quickly as that. I know people are skeptical, and you're right too, because listen, this is quite a unique situation, but if it can be done, I think it's mainly because on the Chelsea side as well, it benefits Chelsea if they can get this problem out the way soon, and then they can move on with the rest of their recruitment and maybe have some wages free that they won't be paying Lukaku next season. So let me know your opinions on Lukaku. Let me know your opinions on the fixture list. Everton away. Super frank, of course. Let's hope we can win that game, because I'm sick and tired of Chelsea playing awfully at Goodison Park. We've at least got to score a goal up there this time. And of course, Tottenham at home. Let me know your feelings on the opening to the season. Only a couple of weeks now till pre-season begins, and hopefully going to get some new signings soon to speak about. Thank you guys for watching. All the best, and I'll see you again very soon.